The office buzz was replaced by thunder outside, a storm pressing against the glass walls. Emma's chest heaved as she realized her colleague had stolen her work again, taking credit under the applause of others. Her lips parted, whispering, "They erased me." The fluorescent lights above flickered, throwing her into alternating shadows and light. She gripped the desk edge, her knuckles pale, the sting of betrayal burning deeper than words. Each clap in the room was a knife, each smile proof she was invisible. The storm outside cracked against the glass, echoing her breaking point. Tears welled, but she refused to let them fall. "Not anymore," she whispered, the words jagged but real. In that moment, the silence inside her snapped. Her body trembled, but the tremor wasn't weakness, it was transformation. The woman who blended into shadows was gone. What rose now was unbreakable. The silence lingered even after the last clap faded, wrapping Emma in its heavy grip. She whispered, "Each time I stay quiet, I give them permission to erase me." Her voice cracked, but beneath the break burned raw resolve. The office air was stale with coffee and damp carpet, pressing like suffocation. Emma remembered how many times she had disappeared into corners, blending into wallpaper no one noticed. The sting of tonight wasn't new, only sharper, louder, undeniable. She touched the scar inside, carved from years of invisibility. She whispered again, "I can't live like this." Fear clawed at her ribs, but fury anchored her feet. The betrayal now had faces, her peers smiling, applauding, erasing. She stood, trembling but unbroken. Fear and defiance braided into something fragile, something dangerous, something almost like power. Emma walked home beneath the storm, hair plastered to her face, clothes soaked through. She whispered, "The rain hides my tears." Her shoes slapped against the wet pavement, each step heavy but unyielding. She remembered her childhood dinners, silence binding her while criticism cut like knives. That silence had once been her shield, but now it felt like poison. She clenched her fists, rain washing away excuses, leaving only the pulse of humiliation raw on her skin. City lights blurred into streaks across her wet lashes, each lamp exposing her shame. But beneath it, a voice stirred, a courage she had buried too long. She said to the storm, "This isn't my ending." Thunder rolled back, a drumbeat answer to her vow. The night no longer pressed her into shadows. It demanded she rise. Morning light slanted into Emma's small bathroom as she faced the mirror. Her eyes were red but sharp, alive with something she hadn't seen before. She whispered, "They'll see me." Her reflection was weary, haunted by years of silence, but a fragile spark burned. She brushed her damp hair back, fingers trembling as though wrestling with ghosts. The mirror showed not just her face but the shadows of her past, the criticisms, the overlooked efforts, the years of fading into wallpaper. Today the choice was clear, vanish further or step forward. She pressed her palm to the glass, her breath fogging its surface. Her voice steadied as she whispered, "No more shadows." The mirror didn't move, but the woman staring back seemed to shift, rising, defiant, prepared for war. At work, Daniel leaned against her desk, arms folded, his expression sharp. He said, "You'll keep fading if you let them." His bluntness struck harder than her pain. Emma held his gaze, her chest heavy. She asked, "And if I fail?" Daniel's smirk twisted, cynical but unflinching. "Then at least you fail standing, not crawling." The words stung, but beneath them was truth, stripped of kindness. She realized he had seen her strength even when she hadn't. His honesty was brutal, but it was the push she needed. Emma exhaled, the weight shifting inside her. This wasn't about one stolen project anymore. This was about reclaiming the space denied to her. Daniel's voice echoed like a dare. "Stand or vanish." For the first time, Emma felt the pull of standing. Emma sat in her apartment, silence pressing against the cracked walls like an unwelcome guest. She remembered being a child at the kitchen table, her father's voice sharp as steel, reminding her she was never enough. Her mother's silence echoed louder, like approval of every criticism. Emma pressed her palms into her thighs, nails digging crescents into skin, and whispered, "You were supposed to protect me." The weight of those memories pressed harder than the betrayal at work. She had grown strong by burying herself in shadows, but strength built on silence was a cage. The hum of the refrigerator was deafening in the stillness, and she closed her eyes, reliving the cold faces of a family who never really saw her. "I will not vanish again," she said softly, though her voice trembled. Pain was her oldest companion, but tonight she realized it was also her fiercest teacher. At work the next day, humiliation greeted her like a shadow she couldn't shake. During the meeting, her supervisor praised another colleague for a brilliant idea Emma had crafted herself. The room filled with approving nods, and the sting returned sharper than before. Emma bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted iron, her fists curled under the table where no one could see. She thought, "If I speak, they will laugh. If I stay silent, I disappear again." Both choices felt like traps. Her heart pounded so loudly she feared it might betray her. Daniel's voice echoed in her mind, "Fail standing, not crawling." The words both burned and steadied her. The meeting ended, and no one looked her way. She left the room as if invisible, but inside her chest a storm brewed that silence could no longer contain. After the meeting, Daniel found her alone in the hallway. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his sharp gaze cutting through her silence. Daniel said, "You think shrinking will save you? It won't." Emma flinched but didn't move. His bluntness felt cruel, but beneath it was something that unsettled her, truth. She whispered, "I can't risk it." Daniel's mouth twisted into a half-smile, more bitter than kind. "Risk is the only way forward. You'll either bleed now or rot slowly." The words stung like open wounds. For a moment, Emma hated him for forcing her to face what she already knew. Yet as she turned away, her steps felt heavier, not with defeat but with reluctant clarity. His cynicism was brutal, but it had stripped away the last excuse she had been clinging to. Emma sat at her desk that evening, long after everyone had gone. The office was empty, except for the hum of machines and the faint rattle of the air conditioner. She stared at the blank screen, the cursor blinking like a cruel reminder of her silence. Her reflection ghosted faintly in the monitor, eyes heavy with exhaustion yet alive with unrest. She whispered, "I've spent my whole life hiding, and it has cost me everything." The truth struck her harder than any insult. Survival had become her prison. Her fists hovered over the keyboard, but she didn't type. She only breathed in the stillness, the weight of years pressing down. She realized she was standing at a threshold, crumble further into invisibility or risk herself in the light. The decision clawed at her, and in that struggle, she finally understood she had something left worth losing. Alone in her small apartment, Emma sat by the window watching the rain streak down the glass. The city outside glowed faintly, indifferent to her struggle. She whispered, "All my life I fought to be invisible, but that fight is killing me." The storm reflected her own restless spirit, loud and relentless. Her chest ached with fear, but beneath the fear burned a thread of defiance. She remembered Daniel's blunt words and felt a strange gratitude for their cruelty. She thought of her parents' silence, her colleagues' theft, the countless moments where she surrendered her voice. The sum of them all had carved her into someone unrecognizable. But tonight, she felt the first spark of a new self, fragile yet real. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass and whispered, "No more shadows. Tomorrow, I step into the fire." The office buzzed with chatter as Emma watched in disbelief. Her project, every detail she had crafted, was being celebrated under another's name again. Applause rose, but it struck her like thunder, each clap an insult. Her stomach tightened, fury pressing against her ribs until she could barely breathe. She whispered to herself, "They've stolen me piece by piece." Her hands clenched into fists under the desk, fingernails digging so deep they left red crescents. The humiliation was sharp, but anger roared louder. Her silence, once her shield, had become a weapon others used to wound her. She realized the theft was not just about ideas, but about her existence. Every smile in the room was a reminder she was unseen. For the first time, despair didn't bury her. It demanded she rise. "No more," she mouthed, the storm inside her louder than the applause outside. Emma sat frozen as the applause died down. She wanted to shout, to rip through the room with words sharp enough to cut, but her lips refused to part. She felt smaller with every passing second, as though the chair itself was swallowing her whole. The silence she clung to felt like shackles, binding her more cruelly than the betrayal itself. She whispered to herself, "Speak, or they'll bury you alive." Her body betrayed her, trembling with fear, but her mind screamed in defiance. The weight of being dismissed, ignored, stolen from, was unbearable. Every second her voice stayed hidden was another nail hammered into the coffin of her dignity. She pressed her palms flat against her thighs as if bracing for battle, but her lips never opened. The despair crushed her, leaving her hollow and ashamed. Yet deep within, a fire smoldered, waiting for air. Daniel appeared at her side later, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. His sharp eyes studied her with a mixture of irritation and something unspoken. Daniel said, "You think silence will save you, but it's killing you." Emma's chest tightened. His words cut like glass because they echoed the truth she wanted to deny. She said softly, "You don't understand." He smirked bitterly, his voice steady. "I understand more than you think. Silence is just slow death." His tone lacked comfort, but his bluntness hit like a wake-up call. Emma hated him for his coldness, but the truth burned deeper than any kindness could. He was forcing her to see that survival required risk, and risk meant pain. She looked away, ashamed, but inside something shifted. His cynicism, though harsh, had cracked the shell she built around herself. That night, Emma sat alone at her desk long after everyone had left. The office was silent, filled only with the faint hum of machines and the blinking cursor on her screen. Her reflection in the monitor looked hollow, eyes ringed with exhaustion, but lit with restlessness. She whispered, "Every time I stay quiet, I let them erase me." The words were fragile but true. She thought of Daniel's sharp voice, his cruel honesty, and realized he had seen something in her that she barely recognized. The cursor blinked like a heartbeat, steady, waiting, taunting her to act. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard, trembling as though the decision weighed more than she could bear. She didn't type a single word. Instead, she sat frozen in the glow, understanding that silence was no longer safety, it was surrender. Later at home, Emma lay awake staring at the ceiling, the rain tapping against the window. The city hummed faintly beyond the storm, but her mind was louder. She whispered, "I won't break." The words felt foreign but carried strength. Memories of betrayal clawed at her chest, but instead of crushing her, they ignited her anger. She thought of her parents' silence, her colleagues' theft, Daniel's brutal honesty, and realized every moment was pushing her toward a choice. She had been surviving by shrinking, but shrinking had stolen more than anyone else ever could. She clenched her fists, feeling the sheets twist beneath her hands. Her heart pounded like a drum, not in fear but in defiance. She exhaled slowly, whispering into the darkness, "Tomorrow I will fight." The storm outside echoed her vow, thunder rolling like a promise. Emma stood in the office archive, dust heavy in the air, shelves stacked with forgotten work that no one cared to remember. She pulled a battered folder free, her name scribbled faintly on the cover. Her breath caught when she opened it. Page after page of her own words, strategies dismissed months ago as unpolished. She whispered, "This was mine," voice trembling with shock and fury. Her hands shook as she turned the pages, realizing these ideas could have changed everything if given the chance. She thought of the countless times she'd been ignored, told her voice was too soft, her thoughts too naive. Yet here was proof that she had always been capable. The world had never seen her, but she had been shining in secret. The folder felt heavier than its paper. It was the weight of her silenced self. She whispered, "I am not nothing." The next morning, Emma stood among her coworkers during a casual team huddle, folder tucked under her arm. Her heart pounded like a drum as she forced words out, voice low but steady enough to carry. For the first time her colleagues actually turned toward her. She said, "This could solve the issue we've been stuck on." Silence followed, heavy and uncertain. Normally, her words would vanish into the air, but now eyes lingered on her, waiting. A colleague muttered, "That's actually good." Emma blinked, startled, as if recognition was a foreign language she barely understood. Fear swelled in her chest, yet so did a strange spark of pride. The weight of being heard was both terrifying and exhilarating. She realized the silence she had lived in was beginning to fracture. She whispered inside, "They heard me." That fragile spark was the beginning of a flame. Later in the day, a senior colleague laughed, mocking her suggestion in front of the group. "You think that would work?" he sneered, tone dripping with dismissal. Emma felt her blood run cold, her silence clawing at her throat like a trap. But her body refused to bow. She forced her voice forward, shaking yet clear. "Eyes, and I can prove it." The words sliced the room into silence. Her pulse thundered, her palms damp, but she had spoken against authority for the first time. The risk felt unbearable, yet liberating. She realized in that moment that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to walk directly into it. The laughter stopped. The colleagues who had ignored her now stared, some curious, some unsettled. Emma's body trembled, but her spirit held. For the first time, she had refused to vanish. She stood, unbroken. In the break room, Daniel leaned against the counter with his usual smirk, arms folded. He said, "About time you stopped hiding." Emma bristled, anger flashing hot. "You don't know what it cost me," she snapped, voice sharper than she intended. For a moment, he studied her in silence, his smirk faltering, eyes narrowing with something more thoughtful. "That's the point," he said finally, tone quieter, heavier. "Courage costs. If it didn't, it wouldn't matter." His words weren't meant to soothe. They were meant to challenge, to press her forward. Emma realized then that his cynicism wasn't disdain but belief, hidden in barbs. For the first time, she met his gaze without flinching, her voice steady. "I won't disappear again." Daniel's smirk returned, this time softer, less mocking, as though he had been waiting for this moment. He nodded, acknowledging her fire with respect. That night, Emma pulled an old box from beneath her bed. Inside were journals filled with thoughts and dreams she had abandoned, pages of words she once believed were worthless. She whispered, "I was always stronger than they knew." Tears blurred her vision, falling onto faded ink, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were of recognition. Each page told the story of a voice buried, not broken. She realized she had not grown weaker through silence. She had been gathering strength, even in hiding. Every sketch, every note, every line was proof of a woman who had always been waiting to rise. Her hand rested firmly on one open journal, a silent vow written in flesh and bone. She said softly, "Tomorrow, I speak louder." The storm outside softened into rain, and for once the night didn't feel heavy but alive with possibility. Emma walked into the office the next morning, to whispers that pricked her skin like needles. A colleague, the same one who had smiled while stealing her work, was now spreading lies that her sudden courage was reckless, even dangerous. The betrayal felt sharper than knives, not because she didn't expect it, but because it came from someone she had once trusted. She muttered under her breath, "They'd rather destroy me than admit I was right." Her chest tightened, fury and grief colliding inside her ribs. For a moment, the weight almost broke her knees, but she steadied herself, gripping the edge of the desk. The truth was no longer hidden. Betrayal wasn't just about stolen work, it was about a system built to erase her. And yet, instead of shattering her, it forced her spine straighter. She whispered, "Then let them try." Alone in the bathroom, Emma leaned against the cold sink, her reflection fractured in the cracked mirror. She whispered, "What if I'll never belong anywhere?" Her throat tightened, the familiar weight of doubt pressing heavy. She had spent her whole life as an outsider, at home, at school, now here. The thought clawed at her, threatening to undo the fragile progress she had made. But as she studied her reflection, she realized belonging had always been the wrong question. Her face, tired yet determined, was not asking for permission anymore. She exhaled slowly, whispering, "I don't need to belong. I need to be." The words startled her, but they rang truer than anything she had ever said. For the first time, she saw not a ghost but a woman standing in defiance of invisibility. The storm inside her steadied into focus. Later, Daniel found her sitting alone, hunched over a notebook, scribbling furiously. He raised an eyebrow and said, "Finally putting that fire to paper?" Emma glared at him, but he didn't flinch. She said, "I'm done being erased." Daniel shrugged, smirk curling, though his eyes softened with quiet respect. "About time." His words carried no kindness, only acknowledgement, the kind that felt heavier than praise. Emma felt her jaw tighten, but she also felt something unshakable in his presence: belief. For years he had kept his distance, hiding behind sarcasm and cynicism. But now, his voice was a mirror showing her the power she had denied herself. She whispered, "I will fight." Daniel gave a single nod, as though the words sealed a pact. For the first time, she realized she was not standing alone. That evening, Emma uncovered an old family letter tucked inside one of her journals. It was her mother's handwriting, sharp and cold, dismissing her as too timid, too weak. Reading it, her chest ached. But then something shifted. She realized every cruel word had been the soil where her resilience grew. She whispered, "You were wrong." For years she had lived to prove her family right, shrinking, silencing herself, fearing failure. But now she understood. Her silence had never been weakness. It had been endurance. She traced her fingers over the faded ink, eyes burning with clarity. "I will not inherit your shadows," she said, voice steady. The letter that once crushed her was now powerless. Her mother's judgment no longer defined her. For the first time, Emma felt the chains of her past fall away. Emma stood at the office window the next day, storm clouds rolling above the city. She whispered, "No more silence." Her reflection stared back, not as a ghost, but as a woman rising into her own light. For the first time, she felt the weight of her pain transform into purpose. Every betrayal, every doubt, every scar had been a lesson carved deep into her skin. She realized she wasn't just fighting for herself, but for everyone who had been silenced, overlooked, dismissed. She pressed her palm against the glass, the storm outside echoing the storm inside. "I will not vanish," she said, her voice firm, her spine unshaken. This was no longer survival. This was rebellion. The storm cracked with thunder, as though the world itself was listening to her vow. The meeting room was full, tension thick in the air. Emma stood at the head of the table, her folder open, papers spread out like weapons. The supervisor who had stolen her work smirked, confident she would fold. But Emma's voice cut through the hum of the room, sharper than glass. "This was mine, and you know it." The words froze the air. Gasps rippled, chairs shifted, and every eye turned toward her. Her pulse hammered in her throat, but her voice didn't break. Years of silence cracked wide open in one explosive truth. The man scoffed, muttering, "Careful, you're making accusations." Emma's chest burned, but she met his gaze without flinching. She said, "I'm not accusing, I'm reclaiming." The room erupted in whispers, the balance of power shifting like a storm breaking. For the first time, she was not invisible, she was undeniable. Emma's heart thundered, but her words poured out like fire. She pointed to charts she had prepared, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Every line, every detail, this is my work. You erased me to stand taller." Her colleagues shifted uneasily, the truth undeniable in the evidence she laid bare. The supervisor sneered, dismissing her as emotional, but the power in her voice drowned his dismissal. She said, "You can mock my tone, but you can't erase my truth." The room quieted again, the silence no longer one of dismissal, but of recognition. Emma felt fear clawing at her chest, yet with every sentence it burned into defiance. For years she had been told she was weak, but here she stood, her weakness transforming into strength. The tremor in her hands no longer betrayed her, it fueled her. The tension snapped when a colleague finally spoke. "She's right," they said quietly, then louder. "This is her work." The words shattered the silence, and Emma's chest surged with something unfamiliar. Allies. For years she had stood alone, but now voices began to rise with hers. The supervisor's face paled, anger twisting his mouth. But the tide had turned. Emma's hands still shook, but not from fear, from the sheer force of standing in the storm she once avoided. She whispered inside, "This is what it feels like to fight." The room became electric, whispers turning into murmurs of support. For the first time, she saw cracks in the wall that had kept her small. They weren't just cracks, they were doorways. She straightened her spine and spoke again, louder. "You will not erase me again." The supervisor leaned forward, voice sharp, desperate to reclaim control. "Do you really think you can win against me?" he hissed. Emma's throat tightened, but the weight of her silence was gone. She said, "I already have. You built power by erasing others. I built mine by surviving." The words cut deeper than any accusation. Daniel stood in the back, arms crossed, eyes locked on her, his faint smirk carrying pride instead of cynicism this time. The room stilled, breath held, as if waiting for someone to break. Emma refused to look away. Her body trembled, but her gaze was unshaken. She realized in that moment she wasn't just confronting him. She was confronting every voice that had told her she was nothing. And she was still standing. Her silence was gone, replaced by fire that could not be smothered. The confrontation reached its peak. Emma stood tall, chest heaving, as the storm outside cracked thunder against the glass windows. She said, "I am done being silent. This is my work, my voice, my fight." The words rang through the room, echoing louder than the storm. Her colleagues, once complicit in silence, now nodded, murmuring agreement. The supervisor slumped back, cornered by truth he could no longer deny. Emma felt the weight of years lifting, her spirit burning free. She realized this moment was not about victory over one man. It was victory over the shadow that had haunted her since childhood. Her fists slowly unclenched, fingers steady now, her body trembling with release instead of fear. She whispered inside, "This is my freedom." Thunder rolled again, but it no longer felt like mockery. It felt like applause. The meeting was over, the room emptied, but Emma remained standing at the head of the table, her hands flat on the polished surface. The silence was no longer crushing, it was liberating. She whispered, "I said it." And they heard me. The storm outside softened, rain tapping lightly against the glass. For the first time, silence felt like her ally instead of her enemy. The space that once suffocated her now seemed wide open, as if it belonged to her. Every scar, every doubt, every betrayal had carried her here. The quiet applause she once dreamed of no longer mattered. What mattered was that she had reclaimed her voice, and no one could steal it again. Her body trembled with release, but her spirit burned steady. She left the table, not as someone escaping, but as someone who had finally claimed her place. The next morning, Emma walked through the office as whispers followed her, but they no longer pierced her. She carried herself differently now, shoulders squared, steps steady. A colleague who once ignored her glanced up and nodded, subtle but telling. She realized she didn't need validation to exist. The acknowledgement was simply proof of the shift she had created. She whispered to herself, "Respect isn't given, it's claimed." She passed her supervisor's door, left ajar, his face hidden in the glow of a computer screen. For once, she felt no fear of his shadow. He was no longer her cage. The office air still smelled of paper and coffee, but for Emma it tasted different now. Sharp, alive, hers. For the first time she belonged not because they let her, but because she decided she did. Later, Daniel found her at the coffee machine. He raised an eyebrow and said, "So you finally lit the fire." Emma met his gaze calmly, the old hesitation gone. "It was always burning," she said, voice even. His smirk deepened, less cynical now, edged with respect. For the first time, she didn't shrink under his stare. She realized his role had never been to comfort her, but to push her until she discovered her own strength. He tilted his head, muttering, "You're not invisible anymore." Emma replied, "I never was. I just forgot." The words rolled easily, not defensive but certain. For a moment, silence stretched between them, and it was not heavy but steady. She didn't need his approval, but his recognition was its own quiet victory. She turned back to her coffee, smiling faintly, ready for what was next. That evening, Emma walked home under a sky streaked with fading sunlight. The storm had passed, leaving the streets washed clean. She breathed in the cool air, her chest lighter than it had been in years. Each step echoed with certainty, no longer a march of survival, but of presence. She whispered, "I am here." The city lights flickered to life, and for the first time she didn't feel like an outsider in her own world. The echoes of her past still followed, but they no longer chained her. She had carried shadows long enough, and now they trailed behind her instead of blocking her path. She lifted her chin, her stride even, her spirit awake. The night stretched before her, not as something to endure, but as something to claim. She felt both fragile and unbreakable, a paradox that defined her freedom. In her apartment, Emma sat at the window with her journal open, pen steady in her hand. She wrote, "This is not the end. This is the beginning." She closed her eyes, remembering the girl who had once hidden in silence, the woman who had been overlooked, erased, betrayed. That person had not disappeared, she had transformed. She whispered, "No more shadows." The city hummed outside, alive and relentless, but for once it didn't intimidate her. It called to her. The scars remained, but they were no longer wounds. They were maps, guiding her forward. Emma smiled faintly, the kind of smile born not of joy but of triumph earned through fire. She closed the journal, placed it on the sill, and leaned back. The silence in the room was not empty anymore. It was full of her.